For over a century, the geopolitical map of North America has been defined by a single, comfortable myth, the undefended border. We are told that the United States and Canada are inseparable siblings, economically fused and militarily united. But as of this week, that century-long peace is effectively over. The special relationship hasn't just cracked, it is facing a total systemic collapse. Washington has just issued a threat that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago, a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods. We need to be precise about the gravity of this. This isn't a bureaucratic spat over dairy quotas or softwood lumber. In the world of macroeconomics, a 100% tariff is the nuclear option. It is a weapon designed not to negotiate but to destroy. It is a blockade in all but name, threatening to freeze over $2.6 billion in daily trade and send both economies into immediate cardiac arrest. Why now? Why would the U.S. risk blowing up its own supply chains? Because the White House believes Ottawa has committed the ultimate betrayal. While American eyes were locked on the southern border, Canada initiated a risky power play involving the one rival Washington refuses to tolerate, China. U.S. intelligence and trade officials are no longer looking north and seeing a compliant junior partner. They are seeing a Trojan horse, a deliberate backdoor allowing Beijing to bypass American economic defenses. The polite diplomacy of the G7 is dead. The ultimatum has been delivered, and for the first time since the 1920s, we are forced to ask the unthinkable question: is Canada preparing to defect from the American sphere of influence for good? To understand why the White House is ready to essentially detonate the North American Free Trade Zone, you have to look past the political rhetoric and follow the money. The specific catalyst here is what insiders are calling Ottawa's strategic pivot. While the United States has spent the last 2 years erecting a massive tariff wall to keep Chinese state-subsidized industries out, specifically targeting EVs, steel, and batteries, Canada has been accused of quietly unlocking the back gate. The deal on the table is a classic geopolitical transaction. Canada is desperate to secure a market for its massive agricultural output, specifically pork and canola, which has faced turbulent demand from the West. In exchange for Beijing reopening its doors to Canadian farmers, Ottawa has hesitated to fully mirror the aggressive U.S. blockade against Chinese technology. To the Canadian government, this is simply diversification. It is a survival strategy. After years of facing erratic U.S. protectionism, unpredictable lumber tariffs, and the constant threat of USMCA renegotiation, Canada has realized a terrifying truth. Reliance on the U.S. market is a liability they can no longer afford. They are frantically building a Plan B economy. But to Washington, this isn't diversification. It is a hostile act. The U.S. Department of Commerce views this pivot as the creation of a massive transshipment hub on their northern border. The fear is simple but devastating. Chinese companies can ship components or near-finished goods into Canada, slap a Made in Canada sticker on the final assembly, and then ship them south into the U.S. market duty-free under the protection of the Free Trade Agreement. Washington believes Canada is effectively laundering Chinese goods, allowing Beijing to bypass American sanctions and flood the market from the north. The U.S. argument is that you cannot be part of the North American security perimeter while simultaneously cutting side deals with its primary rival. Canada is trying to play both sides to save its economy, but in doing so, it may have just handed the U.S. the justification it needed to close the border for good. But the economic war is merely a symptom of a deeper strategic panic. Shift your gaze north to the melting ice of the Arctic Circle. This is the stage for the next great power struggle, and the United States has realized its roof is dangerously exposed. Remember the headlines about the U.S. offering to buy Greenland? The media mocked it as a real estate tycoon's fantasy, but in the halls of the Pentagon, it was a deadly serious maneuver to secure the North American flank. When that offer was rejected, Canada didn't just watch, they quietly mobilized, aligning diplomatically with Denmark to assert strict sovereignty over the Arctic. The core of this conflict is the Northwest Passage. As the ice melts, this route is becoming the Suez Canal of the North, capable of slashing shipping times between Asia and Europe. Canada asserts this waterway is internal sovereign territory, their land, their laws. The United States vehemently disagrees, classifying it as an international strait, free for U.S. Navy submarines to traverse at will. And they have been. Reports of U.S. nuclear submarines operating in what Ottawa considers internal waters have spiked diplomatic tensions to levels not seen since the Cold War. For Washington, this is existential. Under the Fortress North America doctrine, they cannot allow a middle power, even a polite one, to control the entry gates to the continent. With China declaring itself a near-Arctic state and hungry for the trillions in rare earth minerals buried under that ice, the U.S. fears Canada is the weak link in the chain. If Ottawa sides with European interests or fails to defend the passage, the U.S. loses control of its own hemisphere. We need to analyze the sheer financial insanity of this threat. In military strategy, there is a concept called mutually assured destruction. We are witnessing the economic equivalent of that doctrine playing out in real time. Most people visualize the U.S. and Canadian economies as two neighbors trading over a fence. That is fundamentally wrong. They are not neighbors. They are a single biological organism, joined at the hip. There is no clearer example of this than the automotive industry. A single transmission gear or seat frame often crosses the border up to 7 times for different stages of refinement before it is finally bolted into a car in Michigan or Ontario. If Washington actually pulls the trigger on a hard border closure, the result isn't a slowdown. It is immediate paralysis. Within 48 hours, just-in-time inventory systems run dry. Detroit stops working. American factories go dark. The immediate shock to the U.S. manufacturing base would be catastrophic. But here is the brutal asymmetry of power, and this is what the White House is banking on. The United States, with its massive internal consumption, creates the economic weather. Canada simply lives in it. While a trade war would trigger a painful recession in the U.S., it would likely cause an instant Great Depression-level collapse in Canada. With 75% of all Canadian exports heading south, Ottawa literally has nowhere else to go. The U.S. has the leverage to endure the pain. Canada does not. For you, the consumer, this geopolitical poker game means the price of your next vehicle and the food on your table is being held hostage in a battle for dominance. While the headlines focus on factories and physical borders, a silent, perhaps deadlier war is being fought in the cloud. This is the hidden front that confirms Washington's suspicion that Ottawa has turned hostile: the digital services tax. For years, the Canadian government has watched helpless as billions of dollars in advertising revenue and user data flowed out of their economy and straight into the coffers of Silicon Valley, Google, Meta, Amazon, often without a cent of local tax being paid. In a desperate bid to reclaim that wealth, Ottawa imposed a controversial, retroactive 3% levy on these digital giants. To Canada, this is a matter of fairness and sovereignty. But Washington does not view this as tax policy. They view it as a targeted raid. To the U.S. Trade Representative, this is a discriminatory tariff designed specifically to loot American innovation to plug Canadian budget deficits. The response has been disproportionate and brutal. The U.S. isn't just threatening to tax Canadian software in return. They are threatening asymmetric retaliation, hinting at blocking Canadian energy exports or restricting Canadian banks' access to the U.S. financial system. This dispute is the final piece of evidence for the White House. Canada is no longer just a friendly neighbor. It is actively attacking American capital. It is easy to dismiss today's tensions as temporary political theater, but history whispers a darker warning. Buried deep within the U.S. National Archives lies a declassified dossier known as War Plan Red, drafted in the late 1920s and updated continuously until the onset of World War II. This was not a vague theoretical exercise. It was a detailed, actionable blueprint for the United States Army to invade Canada, seize the logistical hub of Montreal, and bomb the port of Halifax into dust. Why would the U.S. plan to destroy its neighbor? Because back then, Washington didn't see Canada as a brother. They saw it as a dangerous imperial outpost of the British Empire, a potential landing zone for a foreign superpower to strike at America's industrial heartland. Fast forward to 2026, and the geopolitical map has changed, but the fundamental fear remains paralyzed in time. The strategic logic of the 1920s has been resurrected. The actors have simply swapped costumes. In the 20th century, the existential threat was British naval dominance. Today, it is Chinese economic infiltration. The United States has never truly been comfortable with a sovereign power on its northern border that it does not control. The lesson of War Plan Red is clear. When Canada is perceived as a conduit for a rival power, whether it is King George V or Beijing, the longest undefended border in the world stops being a monument to friendship. It becomes a strategic liability that must be neutralized. So, where does this leave us? We have arrived at a definitive fork in the road for North American history. The status quo is dead, and Ottawa faces a binary choice, neither of which is pleasant. Option 1 is capitulation. Canada scrapes the China deal, repeals the digital services tax, and fully aligns its foreign policy with Washington. This secures the economy but comes at a humiliating political cost, the effective end of Canadian sovereignty. It would mark the transition of Canada from an independent partner into a vassal state, a resource colony existing solely to feed Fortress North America. Option 2 is the breakup. Canada doubles down, refusing to be bullied. They keep the Chinese investment and look to Europe and Asia to replace American markets. But let's be clear about the price tag. This means a massive, permanent drop in the Canadian standard of living. As one leading macro strategist warned this morning, the era of polite free trade is dead. We are now in the era of raw coercion. The uncomfortable reality is that economic gravity rarely favors the smaller planet. The United States has the weight to force a decision. In the coming months, Canada will likely be forced to make the hardest trade-off of all. It can keep its sovereignty or it can keep its prosperity. It likely cannot keep both. We are witnessing the potential end of the most stable alliance in modern history. This is not merely a diplomatic cold shoulder. It is a fundamental redrawing of the economic map. Whether you are an investor watching currency markets or a citizen watching grocery prices, the stability we took for granted is evaporating. The North American continent is no longer a sanctuary from global chaos. It has become the front line. Canada is now caught in a vice grip between the world's reigning hegemon and its rising challenger. The choice Ottawa makes in the next few months will not just determine the price of a car or a bushel of wheat. It will define the next century of Western geopolitics. So, I want to turn this over to you. If you were sitting in the Prime Minister's chair right now, what would you do? Do you bow to the United States to save your economy, or do you bet on China to save your independence? Let me know your strategy in the comments below. And as this trade war escalates, make sure you are subscribed to the channel because we will be tracking every move.